Welcome everyone. This is our first Q&A session this fall. We had quite a few in the spring and quite a few last year as well. They're all posted on YouTube. Very excited today to have Star alum John Dunkel here with us. John will introduce himself and we will get going with the Q&A. But just for everyone who joined in the last couple of minutes, as you may have heard Marcy saying, there's not too much of ground rules, but we want to make sure that you can add your questions to the chat box. So initially, we usually start off with a few questions that Marcy has for John, and then we'll open it up for anyone. So feel free to start adding your questions. If you want to ask in person with your video on, that's fine as well. So again, very excited to have John on the Q&A session today, and look forward to a very exciting Q&A. So Marcy, take it from here.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Randeep. And I will just echo your sentiments. Again, John, I really appreciate you taking the time for various reasons. It's the middle of the workday for you. You've got a lot going on. I guess I am telling everybody a baby coming in the next few weeks. So we're really fortunate to get time with John now before life as he knows it changes. So I think with that being said, again, we'll get started. And, first, let's just keep it really simple. I would love for you to just give us, John, a brief intro of who you are, where you work, where do you live, where you went to school. I know a few of us know this information, but the majority of the people on the call don't. So yeah, anything you'd like to share just as a high level overview would be great.
Cool. Well, yeah, thank you. And yeah, congrats and thanks for putting together this video series. I watched a couple of the other ones. I think they're great. And yeah, this is the last time you'll see me rested for about the next 5 years. So yeah, enjoy it. So I work at a company called Zero Hash. It's a crypto infrastructure as a service company. So you can kind of think of it maybe like the Stripe for crypto. So we create a set of APIs. If your company wants to get into crypto, say you do trading, you can plug in some APIs and we'll enable that. Maybe you want to do customer loyalty or like NFTs. So whatever it is, you don't need to have a whole crypto team or a blockchain team. You can actually plug into us and we'll power that for you. We hold licenses, we're regulated, for instance, like the NYDFS. We're expanding globally. We raised our Series D round in Q1 of this year and Series C towards the end of last year. So it's growing. We're in a good spot. There's definitely some economic uncertainty out there. Some people claim we're in a crypto winter, and so there's definitely some interesting factors. It's an interesting time to work in crypto, but happy to talk through this. Especially at the end, answer any questions. But yeah, I think, I started my career, my undergrad, not even knowing what a product manager was, and somehow ended up doing that. I had no idea, crypto didn't probably exist when I graduated undergrad. So yeah, I can just talk through my journey and how I ended up in these areas. And yeah, I'm actually coming to you from California. So I live in Redwood City. Yeah, it's like 85 degrees here today. So if I'm sweating, it's not the questions.
Well, it's about 48 here in New York, so I don't know which one I prefer right about now. Maybe something in between would be perfect. But thanks, John. Yeah, I think we could start off with maybe you telling us a little bit about your pre-MBA background, like you alluded to. Where you are now is a far cry from where you started. And we'd love to hear more about your post-MBA career path that led you to your current career. And maybe if you could talk about a couple of the key inflection points in your career journey so far, I think that would be a great place to start.
Yeah, sounds great. I would almost split my career probably in two halves. So the first being, after undergrad, what I was doing up through the MBA, and then the second half really being getting into tech post MBA and up to what I'm doing now. So really in that first half, I studied engineering, electrical engineering. I didn't know what I wanted to do, so I was kind of undecided, but got into engineering because I thought it was somewhat broad-based. And I ended up actually getting my first job through the business school. I talked to a consulting team and they really sold it like you get to travel, you get to go talk to clients, and it's, you get to do this technical side too. So it's kind of like using both sides of your brain. So it sounded interesting. I got to, not completely disregard my technical background. And so it was great. So yeah, I took a job with the Big Four. It was a small group within it that was only like 10 people. They'd previously done work. So it was really for like doing data analytics, writing, code and software products that could find fraud. And one of the big cases they did was for the UN, investigating like Iraq's oil for food program to see if there was fraud being committed there. That was before my time, but I did similar type projects. And so, felt like I was doing some good in the world. But a lot of the clients were in the financial services space. And so I got to really visit quite a few of those and see the different cultures, see the way different companies operated, the different problems they were being faced. So it was pretty interesting from that aspect. I ended up going after a few years in-house to one of the clients. So I was working at a bank then, but doing similar types of roles and really building out these products, kind of talking to teams, seeing what the problems were, talking to clients, understanding what their frustrations were, and working with teams to build these solutions that fix it. So it was kind of in essence doing this product management role, but I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't really have that title. And then I also at this bank, that's when I kind of had a more structured job and was based in one city. And that's when I started my part-time MBA at NYU, which I think probably several people on the call went to as well. And that's where I really got to see a broader landscape of some of these jobs. And that brought me to the second half. So after graduating, where I ended up first working for a company that used to be called Facebook. Some of you may now know it as Meta. But yeah, so at the time when it was focused on social networking, I came in like a product strategy role. So really working like product marketing, product strategy. It was all new to me. The ad space was new to me. Even the cultures were different. So that's kind of why it's like the second half. Tech companies have a very different culture than financial services. And I was really introduced to this idea of like engineering and product-driven companies. And so the contrast here was against some of the financial services ones, which tended to be more sales-driven or more like, hey, the relationship manager, I'm talking to a client, they need this, here, your IT, go figure out a way to build this, where the tech companies were more, okay, the product managers and engineers are going to build and tell us how to sell that. So it might be like a kind of a nuanced view, but it felt pretty different. And it also made me realize the more I worked with these product management teams that, hey, that's pretty interesting. I want to get closer to doing something like this. And then, so that's kind of like that second inflection point would really be, okay, seeing these different cultures, even learning what a PM was. And I think really this third inflection point would just be moving between these different companies. And so I've worked at, so I think 4, I would call it, tech or startup companies, including the one I'm currently at. And each one's been pretty different culturally too. So even within the same industry, there's a lot of differences. I would almost look at it like a spectrum of the size of the company, and it's even within the same industry, it's going to be very different that way. And so I think just learning some of those differences, and then of course, formally becoming a PM and being in that role, which honestly didn't feel that different. It was more of a formality, but I think just, I think a lot of people, especially on this call, if you're looking to get into that and wondering how to go through interviews, and we can talk about that a bit later, it's not always easy to just even get that title on your resume.
That's very true. And I've heard that, from a number of different people. What you're saying rings very true. And I was actually having this conversation with my husband recently as well. And he, like everything you're saying is really resonating and reminding me of that conversation I just had with him. I think I'm going to diverge a little bit from our prepared questions just temporarily, because I'm really excited that Andrew felt so comfortable to be the first one to ask a question here. And I don't want to keep him waiting too long. So Andrew, why don't you ask your question to John, and then we'll hop back into some of our prior questions, because I really want to make sure anything that you guys have on your mind is answered.
Sure, thank you. John, thanks for finding time to speak to us. Could you, my question is, I have actually 2 questions. One of them is, how technical is your role? And basically, how much do you need as a product manager know about software engineering, like computer science in your role? And the second question that I have, like you went to the school, you went to the business school, like how much thing that you learn in the business school you find relevant to your job? Thank you.
Yeah, Andrew, thank you for the questions. So yeah, first, I don't want to scare anyone off. I would say my role right now is a bit more technical just because of the subject matter that it deals with. But so product management, just taking a step back, I think Hewlett Packard is the company that actually started this out, probably in the 1940s. And so it's been kind of staple in Silicon Valley since then. But really, this role has expanded out to all different industries now, even a lot of banks, financial services, even brands, different. I think the more that companies start to rely on technology, the more that they almost structure their organization more, that they develop software with this structure of a product manager working with a team of engineers. And so I think the role, it's going to be across all industries, and it's becoming much more prevalent now. And really one of the things about product management too is, it's very unique. It's almost like saying a consultant, right? Like, what's a consultant? There's a million different types. I think product management is the same way. There's, it's kind of like it's an interesting role because it's like a T framework. So horizontally, you have to be able to, it's a collaborative role. You have to be able to work with everybody within the company. And I think some people really, especially the MBA types, got excited when they're like, oh, I'm the CEO of a product and wanted to go into this. But it's, really I would say it's more collaboration than, you're not walking in a room and telling everyone what to do. It's like, okay, I need to have a conversation with the finance and accounting team and understand how I'm going to project growth. And, what does forecasting look like? How am I going to recognize revenue? And talk to the sales team, like, how do I position this? And, which clients would be good for this? And marketing team, like, how do we, what does the market landscape look like? And then, of course, there's the engineering team. But so you need to work with all of the teams at the company, which makes it kind of a fun role, kind of chaotic, but also fun. But then I think like that T area, so where you vertically need to go deep, that's going to vary. In crypto, that tends to be just knowing about, different protocols and what makes up this ecosystem. But I would say like across industries, that can mean a lot of different things. In even different software companies, that could be learning about, if it's very ad driven, just knowing about the marketing space. It could be the marketing landscape. It can be different, the competitors. There are just specified technical PM roles, and those will really have a technical focus. But there's, I would say, like, whatever someone's unique strengths that they bring to that role, that's really going to depend how much engineering knowledge they need to have versus something else. But it's, I'd say like there should be some area that you bring to the table that you can go a bit deeper on, or are really passionate about learning more, and that can really help you stand out from other PMs. For your second question, so what MBA school is the most relevant to your role? So I have a sample size of 1 as far as it goes to MBA school. So
I think what subject maybe, or like what subjects or skills? I think.
Basically.
That was
sorry.
similar to one of our questions too, Andrew. So that's perfect. Yeah, like what are some of the transferable skills that a lot of MBAs may be developing right now, or if they're lucky enough to have a pre-MBA? But what are some of the skills or classes or courses that you think are kind of serve you well in the role now?
Yeah, and again, I think that will probably kind of be linked to the first of like what type of PM you see yourself becoming. For myself, I see myself more as a generalist. And so, even in undergrad when I was studying engineering, I tried to take a lot of different courses too, like even outside my subject area, just because I didn't want to be just like day and night for 4 years focused on like one specific area. And so same thing with the MBA. I think I got the most value out of it by taking varied courses. Some of those I didn't even know that they would really help connect that until later on. For instance, Stern had a pretty good program where you could study abroad and go to different countries and study for a period of time. One of the ones I did several in Latin America, one in Cuba, one in Argentina. And the interesting thing about Argentina is that we were getting a really good exchange rate there if we brought US dollars, because their currency and their government is in somewhat of a crisis. And so there's such a demand for a stable currency that we were getting a 50% bonus just going, a couple streets over and not going to an official exchange. I had no idea, I could kind of connect the dots, but now looking backwards, you even see some countries like El Salvador that have adopted crypto for that exact same reason, because they have really high inflation and they're experiencing some of those same issues. So honestly, I would say be varied. If something interests you, I would go pursue it, and not necessarily thinking that there's going to be some like immediate return or payoff or not. That's the way I approached it. And I think it was kind of cool that when I would, encountering some new things, then I could recall like, oh, I took this course. I didn't even know that I was that interested in it, but it actually applies here.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. And I think kind of along those lines, because we had a similar question to Andrew and then a follow-on question. Since we do have quite like a diverse group of students and possibly some alumni here today as well, I think a few people have mentioned to me previously that they're interested in understanding if there's any particular industry or vertical that hires more product managers that may have less experience or little to no experience up until their MBA, where you feel it might be easier to kind of break into these fields? I'm getting the sense, I could be wrong, getting the sense that maybe crypto and blockchain is a little bit harder of an industry to break in as a product manager if you don't have at least some kind of more technical or very direct relevant experience. But what are some of the industries, correct me if I'm wrong, but and what are some of kind of the industries and verticals where it might be easier to make that transition or pivot?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so, I can kind of talk through how I went about this. So the way that I transitioned from finance to Facebook was actually just taking the exact same role that I had and moving over to, so really I was switching industries, but my day-to-day was, the culture was different, but the day-to-day work was something that I was familiar with. I think what might be really challenging for some people is when you try to change too many variables at one time, when you're doing a completely different role at a completely different industry, maybe at a completely different size company. And what can happen is you might be struggling and you don't even know kind of which one of those things it's related to. So I try to, and of course I'm saying this with wisdom now, but at the time I was just like, hey, cool, a job in tech. But, looking backwards, it was really keeping most of those things like steady. And really it was just the culture in the industry that was changing. And then once I got inside tech, and then I realized that, okay, now instead of working primarily with X, Y, and Z teams, okay, now I'm more closely working with engineering teams, and they're sending me Jira tickets, and what is this? And I'm having to dig into this, and it was really like a different operating model. Then I got more exposure and talked to more people and realized like, okay, maybe I want to move in this direction. What do I need to do in order to do that? And then once you can network with some of those internal teams, and then they'll let you know if a role opens up, something like that. That's definitely a popular way to do it. So and I don't want to discourage anybody that say, maybe they don't have a lot of work experience, or they're not, so that's one way. And I would say that's a pretty common way to do it. The MBA is also a great entry point to getting into product management or even a different industry, just because there are a lot of programs. Again, speaking just from my Stern experience, I know that there were quite a few companies like Amazon, Google, that even had on-campus recruiting and pathways to go get like an entry-level PM role, and amongst other types of jobs as well. So there's a lot of ways to do this. And I would say probably like a really good one too, if you do not have the formal experience, is just doing something, doing a side project, and just doing something to show that you have an interest in it. The whole way I got into crypto was, in 2017 when Bitcoin was going kind of crazy, my brother-in-law and I were just sitting around like downloading these apps, sending money places, and we were very happily surprised when it actually was a real thing and didn't just disappear. And so I think that kind of started it off. It was just kind of a side thing, and then I started reading about it more and learning about it more, which I probably should have done before actually putting real money into it. But I think as I continued learning, then it was like, okay, this is enough of a side thing. I actually might want to do this as a career. And so going into interviews and being able to kind of describe how you use these products, maybe even you can talk about their own product. If you're interviewing at a company, you can, hey, I walked through this. Why are there 10 steps to sign up? Did you think about doing this? Or what, this was kind of janky step, or like, hey, this step was actually really well designed. And really thinking about it and being able to talk about it from that point of view, really like a customer focused point of view. Those are all things that can really help, as soon as you get that interview, being able to talk about those things, talk about, different side projects or like areas of interest that you have.
Thanks so much. I think that's extremely extremely helpful. And what Randeep wrote in the chat, I have kind of written, you guys probably see me scribbling away some notes here. I think one common theme, no matter who the speaker has been, at least for half of our prior conversations or events that we've had so far, it's always that same advice: never pull more than one lever at once. And that's basically what you were saying. It's a much more risk averse way to still make a change, but to do so in a slightly less risky manner. And I liked how you phrased it, because if you pull too many levers at once or change too many variables, you actually, and then something is not going as planned, it's hard to know sometimes exactly why something is not going well. And I think, changing kind of, it works for careers, it works for life advice, works for, kind of a lot of things, but it makes a lot of sense to, especially when you're really trying to make a big change like this, to really just pull that one lever at a time. I also just, and I hope some more people will not be shy and will either raise their hand, speak up, put some questions in the chat. But I know me personally, I'm also going to ask another one on that's not on our agenda. Sorry, John. I just would like to know, I mean, you've already started to mention what you love. It sounds like I would really love to know kind of what you enjoy the most about your role and what do you find kind of the most challenging. You've already mentioned that it's a little bit chaotic and you get to do a bit of everything. So not to make you repeat yourself or anything, but I would love to understand a little bit more about the, like more detailed what you love about the role. And also, yes, what you find challenging. And then we'll go to Rachel's question. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, yeah, thanks. That's a great question. And I like the thing that drives me first, I think kind of connecting with crypto. Like I think my first jobs, especially out of undergrad, like everyone's just trying to find like a job, right? And that was kind of like my big goal. And then, it's an iterative process and you realize like what you like and what you don't like. And you kind of like, eventually like, kind of bounce around and get to somewhere that you're happy with, or like generally like it has the right trade-offs for you. So the things I like about my job are really, I think crypto overall is kind of the first thing that I've really been involved with that like I'm working on something that I actually like personally too. Going into Facebook, I didn't know anything about marketing tech, but then I got into it and it's very interesting. There's a lot of problems being solved and, especially solving problems at scale. It's interesting. However, I just, I'm not personally in love with advertising. And so it's, I think like it was a great learning experience. And then even in finance, like some of the problems that as a consultant, I was going into companies to solve, sometimes what you find out is like, okay, this is, we're not solving a new problem, right? Like this is a problem that probably was solved with like more IT investment or something. And so I think the thing I like about crypto is one, just the subject matter that like everyone's still figuring it out. There's a lot of innovation in the space. And it's constantly changing. Even if if you look on Twitter and follow some accounts, there's constantly new companies being launched, new chains being launched. You also get the downside. Sometimes like certain big chains go down and there's issues. And so it's being built very publicly and, for better or for worse. And so I like working in a space that's constantly changing, that's constantly evolving, that really day to day, it's not the same. Being at a startup, and then especially in the space, I would say it's definitely not a 9-to-5 job, and it can be more chaotic than other roles have had. But I think it's worth the trade-off because I personally find joy of launching something and like seeing it go live. And I'm sure everyone does that. Like it's great when you get a project out there, or, even at your own roles, finish a major project, it's pretty cool. And so I'm kind of driven by that sense too. And so I think, working kind of behind the scenes and building this thing with a team and, testing it out and making sure it works, and then actually being able to go and see customers use it, that to me is like a really cool moment. And it's like a lot of buildup for that one moment. And but I guess it keeps me going through that cycle. And so really if that's kind of the goal, the day-to-day, the thing I like about my job is working with teams, being able to solve problems, being able to talk to customers, really see what their issues are, because then you can formulate solutions around that. So it's creative from that side. It's also just, there's that social component. It's collaborative, working across the company. And the other thing, and I think probably I might have skipped over this a little bit, just in terms of, what types of roles might have product managers. So, it's across all different industries, but it's going to look different depending on where you're at. So I would say, the size company I'm at now is about 150 people. It's actually doubled in size since I joined earlier this year. And it's cool because everybody too. And that's it. I don't know if anyone's worked in a company that's been like that. But to me, it really changes things when you kind of know it, like at least of everybody, or like know everybody by name and can like know who to go to with certain things. It's a neat quality that I think as your companies grow, it's something that gets lost a bit. And then it's, then when you kind of stop knowing everybody. So I would say like the size of the company right now, kind of the space that I'm working in, and really just, the focus and being able to talk to customers and see these things go live and move at a pretty good pace where that happens pretty frequently. Those are all things that drive me and I find exciting about the role I'm in.
Wonderful. I feel like even though I do something completely different than you for my day job, I feel like the things that you love about your job are also the things I love about mine. Half people, half technical roles, something different every day. the chaos is exhausting, but also very energizing. So I feel like even though we didn't talk about this specifically in our pre-chat, we have a lot in common when it comes to that. So on the flip side, how about you kind of share some of the challenges and the struggles that you face and the things that you're dealing with now? Of course, don't disclose anything you're not allowed to disclose, but just in general, it would be really great to understand kind of what the challenges you're facing in the role now are.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably the key thing. It's, people talk about a dream job or anything. There's always going to be trade-offs, and so I view, I think even just speaking a bit more generally. So like even going to the bigger company like like Facebook, maybe where I started, or there's trade-offs. Like it was a bigger company, so there's good things like having more resources and training. But then I think especially when it comes to like entering as a PM. There's always a flip side of every coin. And so, and I like the way you phrased the question, Marcy. And so, even at like a larger company, then it's okay, even if you get in as a PM there, what you might actually end up doing is instead of owning a product, you might actually have like a smaller subset of a larger product. And the product teams tend to be pretty large. So like, maybe your scope gets adjusted, and maybe, there can be just different things that come with larger companies. Being at more of a startup, it's we get to move pretty fast, and PMs coming in, especially PMs on my team, they're owning really big chunks, like they're owning entire products. And so I think that's great. It's good for learning. It's good for just being able to move things. And but yeah, it's there can be an added stress. If something goes wrong, it's not just like, oh, it's that department's problem. It's like, oh, this is everybody's problem now. So it's so I never go too far from my phone, which my wife probably hates. But it's it's good too. But I think like from a learning perspective, and so for me, it's every place is going to have trade-offs, and so I just look at like as long as the upsides far outweigh the downsides, that's the place where I want to be.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Rachel, I don't see you on my main screen, but if you'd like to just oh, there you are. I see you now in the top left. Things are shifting around on me a little bit, but yeah, Rachel, feel free to, come off mute and ask John your question yourself.
Because you already asked so many brilliant questions, so there are not many rooms for me to ask more questions about PM experience.
No, yours is fantastic. I love your question.
Yeah, so that's the why we are joining this session, especially for people who was not PM before MBA, but think someday we want to explore PM in this PM roles in the future. And I think John really gave me really good advice for trying to not to make too many variables, but think it as a long-term plan and to get into the PM roles anyway. So it was really helpful. And I'd like to ask a question. I'd like to make a transition to crypto industry. So I know it's very tech-heavy industry, but if someone who is really interested in crypto industry and someone who wants to work in that industry in the future, but doesn't have any engineering or computer science background, then is there something you would recommend to study at this point? And also just want to hear the recent business trends in crypto industry these days. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, great questions. And it looks like there's one in the chat too. So is this separate too from those? Because I'm happy to answer that one as well.
Yeah, let's answer that one too about the influence. How do you? And I think that kind of relates a bit to Rachel's first question as well. But yeah, not coming from kind of crypto or heavy tech or an engineering-led organization in the past. How do you influence without maybe authority or as much experience as you'd like to have? So yeah, maybe answer that first, and then we could switch to kind of all the crypto trends and things like that. Yes, please. I don't have any other questions in the chat right now, so we can cover all of them and then pop back to mine. I've got a couple other ones I definitely want to cover, but we've got time.
Perfect. Well, yeah, let's tackle these. Well, okay. So first let me so Rachel, I wouldn't let the technical aspect dissuade you at all. Actually, the cool thing about crypto is it's a pretty new industry. Like Bitcoin was created like 10-12 years ago, and there's new chains being launched every day. Entire industry, it's roughly a decade old. So I would say even the experts have not been doing this that long. Some of the best or like the most crypto knowledgeable people I've worked with, and previously to Zero Hash, I was at Coinbase, and so I've worked at some of these companies. Even people a couple years into it, you pick so much up on the job that kind of like regardless of the role. I mean, you can look at any industry really anyone's working in, you're going to learn about that industry, the jargon, how it works, like you pick up a lot by osmosis regardless of what you're in. So I might even say kind of like with the earlier experience of maybe a good way to get in is finding a similar type role and almost doing a parallel move. And then once you're inside there, kind of get a lay of the land, then you could try to switch to PM. That's definitely a good way to go about it. But I think if you personally use some of these apps and download them and just learn about it, and you're really interested about it, I think you will pick up plenty and actually have a leg up over some people. A PM, like day to day, you're not necessarily going to be coding. Like, I'm also at a startup, but sometimes, an engineer will share something and we'll, kind of dig in, or, we'll look at something or try to debug it. But that's not my primary role. Like, that's an engineer's role. And so it's helpful to know it, but I think it just goes with that more like horizontal skill of, hey, can you at least, kind of like have that discussion? And I think if you're pretty familiar with those apps and have used them, you just like are interested to learn about it, you'll be able to have those conversations, because you're like, hey, how does this company solve this, or have we thought about this way? And it doesn't involve touching the code at all. Just I think being familiar with it can help. Was there a second question there, or I can do the one in the chat?
Yeah, well, definitely let's pivot to the one in the chat, just to talk about influencing without authority. That's a very specific but very important. I think that applies even outside of product management, I would say. Let's talk about that, and then we can switch back to what trends you're seeing in the industry.
Right, got it. Okay. Well, yeah, I can explain a way that I've done this very poorly, the influencing without authority.
Yes, lessons learned are always appreciated. Yeah. We learn just as much from those as all the things that you've done right.
So being a 25-year-old consultant and coming into a new company and realizing that maybe the processes weren't as efficient as a consulting firm, I was going to some meetings and being very confrontational with some very senior people, which I think you're able to do when that company's paying you to do it. Externally, but maybe is not as frowned upon when a very junior person is kind of going about things maybe that goes very against the culture, to the point where my boss, who is actually one of a great mentors I worked for 5 years, kind of told me like, okay, you need to like change your approach a little bit, and so I was able to kind of learn a lot by doing it the wrong way. But I think now, and especially being a PM and having a bit more experience under my belt, I thought, like, going to Facebook, there was a great slogan there that data solves arguments. And so they actually did promote, hey, it doesn't matter, if you're arguing with, Mark Zuckerberg himself, if you can be like, hey, you're wrong for this reason, here's the data, here's the approach we should take. That culture actually accepts that and actually wants you to do that. So I would say this could look differently depending on the industry you're at, how hierarchical it is, or not. But I would say there's ways to do it and ways to get your message across. And I would find the ways that work within that company well, because what works good at one place may not work at another place. But generally, it's I would do it regardless. Try to do it in a respectful way, and do that in a way that you try to get people on your side too. That look, we have the same goal. I think this way could potentially solve it better. What do you think about this? Maybe there's some advantages over this approach. So, and this kind of goes back earlier to what I was saying about, a PM being more of a collaborative role than like, hey, just walk in the room and tell everyone what to do. It's, I'm often wrong. And I think these conversations are helpful too, because it lets me get feedback. It's like, hey, actually, no, your idea is crazy. We're not going to do that. It's like, okay, that's good to know, because, it's a good level set. And I think any idea, it's, you write it down, you can get more eyes on it. I think the more feedback you get on something, the better, because then it just makes it a stronger argument. And then it's like, hey, if I go to the CEO, it's like, hey, okay, all of your direct reports, we've already reviewed this, they approve this, I'd like to go ahead and do this. It's a much stronger argument than like, I think everyone else is wrong and I'm right. Like,
Yes.
so anyways, I've done this, so I've learned from the mistakes here. Happy to, if there's follow-ups, happy to dig into that more.
Yeah,
one
and I
of the
think
things you asked about was even like trends or what's happening in the crypto space. Is that correct, Rachel?
yes. Do you mind if we just take turns and ping pong a little bit? We'll save the crypto trends question just for next. And I just wanted to get to one other question in the chat, but don't worry, Rachel, we're going to get back to crypto trends. I just really like Trisha's question. It's also very, very specific and something that maybe a few others on the call might be interested in as
No
well.
problem.
So, yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, Trisha, I'm happy just to repeat it for you because I can't see you on my screen. So for people with non-PM experience, but some product engineering experience, how do you think we should translate our resumes? Should the engineering part maybe be mellowed down on the resume? So what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, and again, everything, I know I sound like an economist, everything is it depends. But you know, it could depend on the type of company, how structured it is, how rigid it is. When I was first interviewing, yeah, just not having the exact like string match product manager meant I was disqualified by some, but others actually looked at the experience and were able to kind of connect those dots. So, you know, it's going to depend, and there's a bit of luck in here involved too, I'm sure. But that's, you know, if you work close to a product engineering team, I would just try to frame it. I wouldn't necessarily tone it down. If you've done accomplishments, like don't be afraid to show those. But I think what you could do is, you know, if you went outside your role, maybe you did something above and beyond, maybe you kind of took on some scope and even like acted as more of that role, even though your title might have been, you know, product engineer. If you have some experience where you actually did something like that, I think that could be really powerful, because at the end of the day, if a company is doing interviewing and hiring properly, they're really going to care about, can someone do this job right? Not, you know, does the title match like word for word? So, you know, if I saw someone like, hey, I was an engineer, but I actually took an extra scope and I ran this project, and the PM was busy, so I actually drove this and was able to launch this. Great. Okay, you want to be a PM? Come do that. That's awesome. So yeah, I think it really depends. But I think if you can take specific examples and highlight those can be really powerful too. Kind of even going along with what I was saying earlier about, you know, even if you haven't had that role or even close to that role, just even side projects or just, you know, a blog, just something can show like, hey, I went above and beyond it and did something just outside my, you know, specific defined job scope.
Great. And Randeep, I saw you had a question. Thanks for raising your hand. If it's a follow-on question, we should definitely pop over to that real quick.
Yeah, a quick question for you, John. I guess this might be helpful to some of the folks on the call here. If you were interviewing the folks here, right, who do not have all the PM experience for Zero Hash or for Facebook or Meta, what would be the one question you'd ask them, right, to get really to understand, like, if they're the right mindset? Like, if you could spill the beans on that and just let us know, what would be the one question you'd ask? I mean, I'm sure you have several, but what would be the one question you'd ask to fingers if someone is right for a PM role?
Can I mock interview you, Randeep?
Oh,
All right, yeah, let's do it. I
So
don't know the answer, but yes.
I love it.
One of the questions I like to ask is, all right, can you name for me a very popular product that is poorly designed?
One popular product that is poorly designed. You know what? I mean, something that comes to my mind right now, and they may have improved compared to Netflix, the Prime Video app experience. I don't like it so much.
Yeah, and my next question is going to be why. Like, can you give me 2 or 3 reasons why?
I just feel like the recommendations are not that precise, at least in my case, right? B is that just going and coming in and out of the app seems to be a little bit more like, maybe they want me to stay in the app, but it's just the experience, navigation is not so great. And I would say C, even the search experience is not so optimized for me, but that's just probably me.
Yeah, that's great. And that's honestly like, that's the kind of thing I'm looking to get is, you know, I want signal that someone can just look at a product and actually dissect it. And so like think from it from a user standpoint, what works well, what doesn't work well. And I like to use the common example, because, you know, I can probably think of it or have used it and can kind of like, we're looking at the same thing. But it's also gotten a lot of interesting answers. I've learned about products that I had no idea about, you know, especially what's popular maybe in the US is not popular somewhere else. And so interviewing a wide range of people, like I get to learn something from that question. But it's, yeah, I mean, ultimately the root of that is like, is this person thinking like a product manager? And there's a lot of, you can look up sample interviews online. There's a lot of questions like that, which they're deceptively simple questions. But then, you know, there's frameworks to answer them, and there's ways to break that down. At some point they kind of seem a lot like, you know, especially if people are in an MBA and going through some recruiting, they can seem very similar to maybe like management consulting questions, or some of these, you know, like the ping pong balls in a 747 or something. But I would say like with a little bit more purpose to them.
Thanks.
That's great. I love that. I love that you turned the tables on Randeep and interviewed him. And of course, I think it probably goes without saying, you're more likely to ask an open-ended question like that rather than say, dissect our product. Like, tell me what you think about our products. Or maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps you do get into your own products, but I think you probably, the hope, I'm guessing on your end, is if you were to be interviewing somebody, is that, of course, you know, they're going to have done the homework on your own company. So they're going to be prepared, but can they think on their feet and think broader than just the company that they're interviewing at? Because you want somebody who can think like that, think on their feet, think more broadly, you know, for somebody that might be a good fit for the role. And I guess with that being said, speaking of HR and interviewing and things like that, Hindi, you have a long question in the chat, but I thought maybe if you want to come off mute and just summarize it for John, that would be great, because it's related to what we're talking about right now.
Hey, Hindi.
Hi.
And you guys know each other, so yeah.
Yeah, it's been a minute. So I think Randeep asked part of it, which is, now that you've completed the transition, I'm sure you were asked this question a lot and received pushback. Like, why would we want to hire you, given that you don't have the experience in the industry or the function? You know, you did it first. You did an industry change and then a functional. But how did you overcome that? And now that you would be hiring, if you would be hiring someone in this position, you'd probably be looking for that specific quality. And I think you answered that partly, because you're asking questions to see if the person can think on their feet and be introspective. But if there was anything else.
Yeah, it's a great question. And it, you know, I think part of the challenge too is, and probably where some of the luck comes in, of, you know, even getting the interview. And that's where I think, you know, I would just focus on, are there people in your network you can talk to? And, you know, especially doing the pre-work, even asking about questions, because again, you know, these roles can look very different at different places. And so trying to get a bit more, hey, you know, anything that can position yourself as good as possible, like even to get that, and even maybe getting an interview. I think the easier part is, you know, hey, you can kind of talk about it and explain how your experience actually translates pretty well, and how I'm already kind of doing this, but in a different title. But yeah, I think the first, like, focus on getting the interview, and then once you're there, yeah, you can certainly use talking points. You know, I would probably, you know, try to just show that this is an experience where I did this role, you know, even without the title, or maybe without the authority or something. I don't know if that's right, but yeah. So, but showing like, hey, I acted as this role because I did this, even though it wasn't my title, but hey, you're trying to get specs and build it and drive a team and launch a product and do it. Okay, here, I did that. Or maybe parts of that. Or hey, I really scoped this out, or I helped a PM at my job, you know, figure out this roadmap, or define this piece of strategy, or do a, you know, competitive market map or something. I think the more, like, it wouldn't necessarily be talking points, but I think if like the tangible things that you can show would be the ones that really highlight that. And whether that's even like, and this is where the things like I also mentioned, like the side projects, other things come in, that, hey, I'm so interested in what your company is doing and your product. I've done these things even on the side, outside of my job. I've even broken this down. Like, I think, you know, the more that you can show that you're really passionate about it, then it's, you know, I love to see that as an interviewer.
Thanks, John. And I think, just as I think of things, we have 10 more minutes and we're going to use all of them, or 11 or 12. We're going to use them all, especially if you guys keep these great questions coming. One thing that I will do, and I've made a note to myself, is I think we always tend to send a follow-up email out after this, like kind of summarizing some of the more, salient points that you made, or things that I think would be important as takeaways. I also think that judging by people's questions and interactions, I think I'm also going to ask you to maybe provide some more sample interview questions that people can expect to get on these product manager interviews that they have, and what else they can do to prep for it. So I'm just giving you a heads up, John. It won't be any heavy lifting, but there'll be a little bit of follow-up here. And I promise we are getting to crypto trends, but touched on, and then something you said kind of led very nicely into a question I know we absolutely can't end this chat today on without answering. I mean, I already know the answer. So this is a softball here. First of all, are there currently any roles open at Zero Hash? Are you hiring? Which I know the answer to. And if so, what are some of the roles you'd like to highlight for us today? And of course, we'll also send out a link to kind of the full scope of them after the fact. But what are some of the ones? I know the answer is yes, spoiler alert. So yeah, tell us about some of the roles that are open right now that you or somebody that is hiring for, that people on this call might be interested in.
Yes, and I'm glad you asked. Yeah, so crypto, the economy are probably in interesting places right now, but I think where we sit, and maybe going a little bit into crypto. So some people are probably familiar with exchanges and using the actual products or apps themselves. Maybe they have them on their phone, and this can be even crypto exchanges, but even a lot of brands are now dipping their toes, like Nike, Starbucks, a lot of others are now experimenting with like NFTs. So it's becoming more widespread. So there's this really kind of like the top layer would be like this app layer, and that's not what we do. So we sit a level below that. So we actually do infrastructure, and so I kind of talked about this earlier, but what we do is we make it easy for, if a brand wants to set something up, or a trading app wants to add crypto to that. So we're a pretty versatile platform, and we can support a number of different use cases. But we sit below that, so we actually don't have end customers. And so one of the reasons that Zero Hash is positioned pretty well is that the customers belong to the platforms that use us. Like they're theirs, like that's fine. Like we're not competing against them. And so there's where we sit, 150 people or so, there are bigger players in this space, but they typically tend to have that same product of their own. And so it creates this weird dynamic where they're trying to acquire their own customers, and then they're also trying to serve other companies that and sometimes have that same customer. So it can create some weird dynamics. So we call that channel conflict. And so Zero Hash does not have that. And it's actually led to a lot of companies working with us that have specifically not worked with other players. So we really are hiring. I mentioned we doubled even since when I joined earlier in the year. We continue to hire. So zerohash.com, you can see our careers page, and we have a number of different roles. So it's a company. So if you're more suited to business development or growth or product or engineering or
right, it's not just in the product management space. That's for sure, right? You're kind of hiring across a very broad range, it sounds.
Across the board. So not only are we really just hiring and growing and keeping up with demand, but also we've recently announced that we've expanded. So we're a global company. So we're expanding into different geographies. So the TAM, we just announced Australia. So and obtaining licenses around the globe. And so we're continuing to expand globally too. So even some roles might have specific regions attached to them. So there's a lot of interesting roles. I of course am hiring for product managers. So I'm happy to talk to anyone. Feel free to reach out afterwards.
You got to share it on Sociate too, John. You got to share it.
Sociate, of course. Not forget the good folks at Sociate. But yeah, it's a lot of roles, a lot of interesting things happening. I'm happy to talk more about it. If there's follow-ups, happy to go into that. But a really exciting time. And the cool thing too about being in that infrastructure space, so it's see if you have the apps above it, kind of infrastructure sits below, then the thing kind of below it that we interact with is the protocols themselves, and that would be like the Bitcoins, Ethereum, Solana, Polygon, so the actual protocols. And so it's jobs, even if you're interested in crypto, any of these three levels all have companies, they all have technical, non-technical roles, and they're all going to look slightly different from each other. They're going to be different sizes. So there's a lot to explore generally in the crypto space. So I would encourage, even if you're interested or think you might be, but may think like, oh, well, I don't know how Bitcoin works or something. I wouldn't let that deter you at all. I have learned so much on the job, and I continue to learn so much every day that it's, you know, it's really, if you're open to doing it and passionate about it, it'll just come.
Wonderful. And are these roles specifically at Zero Hash? Are they in person? Are they remote? I just figured I might as well ask that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So yeah, Zero Hash is remote first. So we went remote during COVID, or I think before my time there. But yeah, we continue to be remote first, but we do put an emphasis on having in-person meetups. There's a lot of conferences in crypto to attend. Some of the group is going to, there's a Money 2020 conference coming up that a big team is going to be at in Las Vegas next week. So there's, we do a lot of in-person too. So it's, going back to that theme of like really knowing who your coworkers are, that's not been a problem at all. There's plenty of FaceTime and plenty of meetups, offsites. But then, I also get to work from my 90-degree office. So it all works out.
Thanks. And Rachel raised her hand again. So I want to let her ask, and then we can always roll right into the trend, the crypto trends that you're seeing as well. But what was your other question, Rachel?
This is just a quick question for everyone, but I'm recruiting for full-time, but so I'm gonna definitely reach out to you, John, later after this session. But also I have a bunch of friends who is also very interested in crypto. So does your company also provide some internship experience for this summer? I think I'm just asking a question instead of them.
Yeah, I would have to look at the careers page. So I would take a look. We do have internships and open those roles from time to time. I don't know if there's one currently open right now. A close thing, and we have a product analyst role open, and that could be a really good, I think, entry step, because what this role will do is work with the rest of the product management team and really be a go-to person, assist with different analyses and strategies, roadmaps. And so that can be a really good way to get your foot in the door without, and with the intention of, moving to a different role or becoming a product manager if you want. So that could be, one of those more junior roles that would be, full-time though, and a step above an internship.
Sounds great. Thank you so much.
Great. So yeah, why don't we finally get back to the question about like trends that you're seeing in crypto or the fintech sector overall. I realize that is an extremely broad ask. But if there's any kind of anything, any 2 or 3 things that are maybe top of mind, if you want to share kind of as some parting words before we wrap up, that would be great.
Yeah, there's so much. It's if you turn on the news, you're probably constantly going to see it, or maybe I just notice it because I work in it. But I think adoption is a key theme. Google recently announced that they're getting into this. You've seen Instagram already start to offer NFTs. Twitter has these in their profile pictures. A lot of financial companies have announced this. So it's moved out of this niche thing that it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago to there's actually real world like problems that are solved with it. There's a lot of brands. I think Nike, I was looking at some data, maybe has done over $100 million of NFT sales, if that data is correct. It's, Starbucks announced that they're incorporating this. So I think it's no one wants to be left out now. I think it kind of went from like push to pull. And so it's, it's expanding. I think the other really big theme that's happening is just regulation, which is not, I think in some industries it's like, oh, like that comes with more burden or something else. And so it's different in this case in that a lot of players are actually welcoming regulation and welcoming a clear set of rules. Because crypto is so nascent, you've kind of been working in the space where it's like you set up a lot of programs. There's a huge team at Zero Hash that's compliance, legal, regulatory, setting up KYC programs, KYB programs, and making sure that, at least according to the rules as we know them, we want to be as compliant as possible. And a lot of companies are set up that way. But I think, with regulation coming and actually getting a clear written set of rules, that will make it much easier for players to know, if what they're doing is right or not. And, there's a company called Grayscale right now that's trying to get a crypto product that, a trading product out in the open, and, the SEC is kind of turned them down. And so it's just interesting dynamics to see those play out in a kind of when the rules aren't clearly written, and you're kind of having to interpret those and do your best effort to do those the right way. Those are a couple. I think kind of the third theme is just innovation. Constantly, there's a chain called Aptos that just launched by some former, Facebook people that were building the DM project. There's going to even, other countries adopting this, like, countries are putting this as an official currency. I know at least of like 2 or 3 countries that have done that. Even there's, I think one thing that people think of with crypto is that, oh, it's very volatile and it changes all the time. And so there's this class of cryptocurrencies called stable coins. And for instance, like USDC is one, like US dollar coin. And so they peg themselves to like the US dollar, or try to maintain a peg, so that way, if you use them for purchases or buy something, the value never fluctuates. So actually, you're not going to have like capital gains or something to pay that could discourage payments from some other tokens. So yeah, I realize there's a lot to kind of boil down, but there's a lot that's happening in the space. It's a really cool area to be building in. And kind of what I noticed is it's, culture-wise, when you're in these companies, it's a lot of builders. It's a lot of people that really believe in that mission and doing something. And so, yeah, it's neat. I suggest everyone tries it, because it's it's neat when you're excited about what you do every day.
And that's very apparent, John. I can say, especially you're able to. It was nice that we were able to talk about, focus on kind of your career path and product management as a whole. But just clearly, when you get down into you say, you don't have to know a lot about crypto to work in a company like this, but it's clear that you really enjoy this subject matter and get excited by it and are passionate about it, because I feel like your face lights up when you talk about it, which is a good thing. And I know we're at time. Actually, we're right at time. So I guess we'll stop there. We had 1 or 2 other questions we could have asked, but I'm really glad and grateful to those of you in the audience who weren't too shy to ask a question or two. We always love when people ask questions that are not our own. And just again, John, thank you so much for spending the time, and everybody else, thank you so much for joining us today. As we mentioned earlier, we'll be posting this recording as soon as it's available. Usually we do that within the next couple of days. We also dropped a link in the chat in case you're not already a member of Sociate and you'd like to be. It is free for MBA students and alumni. Now that you've attended an event, of course, you'll still be on our mailing list for when we do hold future events. And that's kind of really all I wanted to say. Randeep, if you just want to quickly close up, and we'll be on our way.
Yeah, thanks, Marcy. Quick thanks again to John, and thanks for putting me on the spot. I haven't had an interview question in some years, I guess now.
You're hired.
Yeah.
Can you take on another job, Randeep?
yeah, in 23 goals maybe. Yeah. All right, cool. So thanks, John, again for giving us such an insightful presentation into PAM, your background about crypto. I learned quite a few things in the last few minutes about crypto, and I hope all of you did. Yeah, and hope all of you did. And again, hopefully we'll be able to put another Q&A session sometime soon that you can join. And that's it for right now. So I hope everyone have a great evening.